So we're moving on from the divisional topic, and we're going to get into this crazy news that has come through from Tampa. So the Buccaneers started the offseason, obviously, in the lieu of Tom Brady with the press conference that he had. We don't know if that was goodbye to football, goodbye to Tampa. So that rumor of where he's going to be has already begun. The next thing, the Buccaneers fired damn near every single coach on their staff. And with this being, your favorite player of all time's team, you being a little bit more in tune with this Tampa Bay team as a whole, what are your thoughts on Tampa firing everybody?
Well, I think just from a general perspective, I'm not saying this wasn't expected. I think to the degree that this was expected, that's a little bit different. So, more than likely, you know, Brian Leftwich was probably going to be on the way out as the OC, just seeing how ineffective Tampa's offense was this year. I mean, Kev, in Brady's first 2 years with Tampa, they were scoring 28 to 30 points a game. They were one of the best offenses in the league. And the stats reflect that. He threw for, I believe, 43 touchdowns in each season those first 2 years. This year, he didn't crack 30. So there was a major drop off from Tom's production. And when it comes to the Bucs offense as a whole, I mean, they took a massive drop off. They became one of the worst offenses in the NFL, especially with running the ball. Kevin, they were averaging 60 to 70 yards rushing per game. That was like bottom of the barrel bad in the NFL this year. So it doesn't surprise me that Brian Leftwich got the boot here. But Kev, let me just go over the list of coaches that left on top of Brian Leftwich. We had their specialist coach, Chris Boniel. I'm probably screwing up his last name. He got cut. Wide receivers coach, Kevin Garver. He's gone. Offensive quality control coach, Jeff Castle. He's gone. And then to kick it over to the quarterback's position for their coaching staff, their quarterbacks coach, Clyde Christensen, and their senior offensive assistant, Rick Christoffel. Those guys retired. So in total, you had like 5 to 6 of their offensive coaching personnel leave or retire. So it tells me that just from the general manager position or the front office perspective, that they needed a whole new slate of offensive coaching staff personnel going into next year. And to be quite honest with you, Kevin, I don't know if you could really blame it on the coaching staff here. I think this year in particular with the Bucs, their ineffectiveness, I think, was really mired with the offensive line just being poor. Now, you could say that the play calling was bad from Byron Leftwich, and I think that definitely has some merit. But, when you lose a couple pieces of your offensive line from last year, you had Ryan Jensen miss the entire season basically due to injury. You're going to be starting guys that just frankly don't have the tenure compared to some vets that were originally on that Bucs offensive line last year. And I think it threw the entire offense into a tailspin. And, that's why you saw the precipitous drop off from an offensive production standpoint. Even if you have Tom Brady back there, you could just tell, like, they were limited offensively. I mean, Kev, he was one of the fastest quarterbacks to get the ball out of his hand as soon as he got the snap from the center. I mean, he was getting the ball out within 2.5 to 3 seconds because he knew if he held the ball any longer, he was either A, going to get sacked, or B, Donovan Smith or somebody on that offensive line was going to get called for holding. And the Bucs were terrible with their offensive holding calls this year, especially Donovan Smith, who at this point, as far as I'm concerned, is a scrub. He played like an absolute scrub this year with how many offensive holding calls that he got. Now, I'm not saying like holding calls happen, but at the frequency that he has been getting these holding calls, it's just utterly atrocious. And I think the Bucs should probably look elsewhere for that left tackle spot since he just failed. There's no other way to say it. Now, I think the only thing that's left is whether or not Todd Bowles is going to retain his head coaching spot. And there's no guarantee with that as far as I see it. And I think if they're going to try to retain Tom, I think they have to basically go all out or all in for Bill O'Brien and hope that Tom is still pretty fond of what Bill O'Brien was able to bring to the table when Bill O'Brien was his OC when both of them were in New England at the turn of the 2010 decade. And in that specific time frame, New England had one of the best offenses to work with. And that was despite the fact that they didn't really have great pieces at the wide receiver core, except Rob Gronkowski, who I believe was only in his rookie or second year in the league. So, when you look at Tampa's offense, they still have some great players. They have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They have Cameron Brate. Julio Jones was there, but he was dealing with injuries. So, just from a target perspective, I still believe that Tampa has some good weapons here. But I think an entire offensive shift, just from a coaching perspective, was needed. Tampa really pulled out all the stops when it came to that because the entire offensive coaching personnel has been completely flipped upside down. And we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But I think a lot of this is basically a decision to try to shake up the offensive coaching staff, try to bring somebody who's a little bit more favorable towards Tom to try to entice him to stay. I know there's a lot of rumors about Tom being potentially linked to Vegas, but I think this was step one of several steps that the Bucs are going to have to take to try to retain Tom going into next year, which I know that they're still pretty high on him as a whole, despite how this year played out. But yeah, definitely some turmoil when it came to the Bucs and their coaching personnel the last day or two. And we'll see what happens from here. But I think with some of these firings, I don't know necessarily if they were justified. I think they just kind of found themselves on the wrong side of the equation and found themselves on the way out based on how the season went. So there were going to be changes coming, but I didn't think it was going to be this significant. So I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Kyle, did you mention by any means or by any chance the offensive line coach being fired?
I did not.
Did you happen to mention any of their strength and conditioning coaches, any of their medical staff being fired?
Not in the list that I have here. Now,
That is very, very interesting.
I will say, though, maybe that's another shoe to drop in the next couple days or so. Maybe this was just the first slew. So I'm not saying that, based off of what we've seen so far, that, we're recording on Thursday, that we could see some more moves potentially within that Bucs coaching staff. So, there's no guarantee that even the offensive line coach and some of the conditioning coaches are going to stay. But as of right now, we're not at that point yet.
Well, I'm only making the point that I'm alluding to in just a moment. I think this is a load of crap. I think this is the front office's way of deflecting and finding a scapegoat. So when Byron Leftwich was the offensive coordinator for the last 2-3 seasons, pretty sure the Buccaneers had a pretty damn good offense when they were healthy. Pretty sure that they won a Super Bowl in the last 3 years. I'm pretty sure their 40-plus-year-old quarterback was in the discussion for MVP a multitude of times. Pretty sure that they made it pretty far in the postseason both times. I mean, like I said, Super Bowl, I know they lost in the divisional in a comeback shootout against the Rams, but that could have gone either way depending on who you ask. So the year that they have a bad offensive performance, riddled with injuries, can't really run the ball because of the offensive line, and the defense decided to take certain weeks off, you fire one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL over the course of the last 3 seasons because you have one bad year. You have arguably one of the worst offensive lines in the entire league, and you do not fire the offensive line coach. Everybody's been riddled with injuries. Defensive side, offensive side, multitude of receivers had some injuries throughout the year, and none of them catch the dust or bite the dust, should I say. I find it comical that Todd Bowles kept his job. When Bruce Arians was coaching this team, there were no issues when the offense had a dip. There were no issues when the defense had lull moments. But the very, very moment they have a negative record, everybody's gone except for Todd Bowles, offensive line coach, medical staff, trainers. Pretty sure they had a multitude of injuries on all sides of the ball. Julio Jones was injured. The offensive line was injured. You had injured running backs. I mean, you name it. There have been problems on that Tampa Bay football team. Tom forces Bruce Arians out of the head coaching position, moves him into the front office. Todd Bowles has to step in and deal with this train wreck of a team. Shaquille Barrett gets injured, so one of his best players on the defensive side, they lose a pass rusher. Obviously, the ineptitude of the offense week in and week out, statistically being the worst team to run with the football, statistically having the worst offensive line, if not one of, and everybody gets the boot except the most important coaches that contributed to this poor performance or poor season. I'm not understanding how Bowles keeps his job. I'm not understanding how Byron Leftwich is the scapegoat here. Why would you get rid of him? There are plenty of head coaches that have years and years and years that are just horrible statistically. Maybe not even a great record. Offensive coordinators that should be fired religiously every single season. Todd Bowles has one bad season because of injuries, and you kick him to the curb for the potential of possibly getting Bill O'Brien? Tom Brady might even leave no matter what. Tom might retire. You can't just clean house unless you're rebuilding or you're bringing an entire new staff based on what Todd Bowles wants because he's the head coach. So he should be able to pick his staff. Unless Bruce Arians is behind the scenes picking and choosing what's going on. Again, this is just really weird, bad timing, and it just doesn't look good for Tampa Bay as an organization to just basically cut ties with everybody except for the key contributors on the coaching staff that did not help Tampa at all this season. I think Tampa's in shambles. If Tom decides to actually fully retire or leave, I think this is the full 100% green light to say, all right, our era for the Super Bowl has closed. Time to start a rebuild. That means everybody else has got to go. No more remnants of this team has to stay. Again, if Todd Bowles gets moved back to defensive coordinator because that defense still found a way to do something and keep them in games, I think that would be fair. But you're going to need a new quarterback. You're going to obviously need to be building up that offensive line again. You're going to need a brand new, complete coaching staff. And who's to say that half the people on this team that were just signed to contract extensions don't want trades, don't want out, don't want to be released, whatever the case may be. We have seen teams and players hold organizations hostage. So we have no idea what's happening in Tampa. It's just a really bad look, and I think it's kind of silly.